our second topic is preparing jobs for the future. So as technologies and markets are evolving, G7 governments will play an important role in the preparing of our citizens and industries for the jobs of the future. So the Government of Canada and its G7 partners have a responsibility to ensure that the opportunities created by the economy of tomorrow are available to all of their citizens, and that the benefits of economic growth are shared broadly. So essentially what we're saying is jobs are changing. How is that going to affect us around the world, and how can we be better prepared? And how do we ensure that it's an equal space as these new jobs come up? Who would like to speak on this one first? Jessica from Italy.
Okay, so as far as workers' rights go in the country of Italy, full-time contracted, indeterminate contract holders have a lot of rights here. It's something that's actually really great. The problem with that is that it's such an offset because people who are holding those contracts are very few, and most are involuntary part-time, and they have much less rights as workers, they have much less benefits, and the workforce is becoming more and more flooded with these part-time workers because businesses, corporations, communities cannot pay for the level of rights that they are giving to the full-time contracted worker. So I think that it's an inherent problem that needs to be addressed. Because yes, it's great that workers can have as many rights as possible, take all of the leave that they need, have health benefits, but it needs to be accessible by the economic growth of the country too. So if there's not enough financial resources to support these kinds of contracts, then we need to think about a different solution for it.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because the jobs are changing 100%. And how do we make sure that no one's left behind, right? Carolina.
I think we have to have memory first and foremost. Industrial Revolution changed everything and people were completely frazzled, right? When that happened. And we've made some huge mistakes then. So let's have memory to look back and realize that as our technology is changing once again, we, for example, must include women in equal opportunities. Like when the Industrial Revolution happened, opportunity for education for education for women, they were not the same as men. So again, as we change into a different kind of industry, and technology is a huge shift, we need to make sure that women and men are educated in these new technologies, and also because, you know, the way I see as an educator, I see the importance of technology in breaking barriers in communication. So many of our students in our system in Ontario are able to express their thinking and creativity more now that they have these more sophisticated tools that sometimes will write for them. So I think the big focus is how can we really understand the technology that we have at hand, because it's a huge shift, and it can, if we do it mindfully and if we're aware, it can bring out the best in us by breaking these communication barriers, by allowing people to express their ideas and vision and creativity, and making the best use of them by including everybody, you know, people with disability, people of minorities, and making that learning more democratic, so that we have a vision of the future that is shared by different experiences, people who are closer to the earth. I think that with the kinds of technology that we have in hand right now, it's unexcusable that we wouldn't include more sophisticated vision and thinking of what our future looks like, because we can even understand, we can measure even how trees communicate. So it's unexcusable that we wouldn't be able to measure or elevate human communication and share those visions amongst us. So that's my piece. I think education, making sure that we include everybody, that women and men have the equal access to education, funding that education, making sure that people can actually, you know, access those tools so they can learn in order to prepare themselves for the future.
Caroline, you raise a really interesting point, because going back to the Industrial Revolution, I think is we have to do that. But what scares me about that is when we look at all of the technology jobs, there's a massive gap right now between male and female workers in technology. Sarah Jean, what do you think about that?
That's exactly where my thoughts were going. And I think part of it is the rise of the power of the multinational corporations, and that governments need to take their responsibilities seriously as far as regulating corporations. Right now, there's so many guidelines, human rights guidelines, that are really voluntary. And I think, so tech is a clear one where we see the gender gap, okay? That's very clear. But I think that when governments, not just my own, I don't know which is my own, but see the importance of the economic return that these corporations bring, that they step back. But their responsibility is to the people to actually make sure that, because our laws are very good for equality, whether they're enforced or not is the important issue, and it's why we have government. And I'm just really concerned that it isn't just tech companies, but right now, that's where we are, that in the area of technology, women, people who are differently abled, people with different backgrounds, who might not be considered as equal for whatever reasons, are just going to be left behind. And we're going to get the stratosphere, and excuse my language, this really nerdy group of guys with lacking social skills who are going to really continue these really sexist, patriarchal ideas, because they'll be allowed to continue this, because they'll be allowed to.
Well, because they've got the power, right? It's the power.
It's the but they're allowed to, because the laws should be protecting our people.
Mm-hmm.
What's in law, what's happening is different. Yeah.
Yeah. Uma, what are your thoughts on this?
In terms of the European Union with technology and industry, I see technology in a couple of different ways. I see technology in industry and the disparities that are there in terms of gender and in terms of people with disabilities and their access to even learning those technologies, but then also the governments and how some of the governments don't have the programs for people with disability to enter into technology in the first place. And this is, for some reason in Europe, there's this very old way of thinking in regards to people with disabilities, that they're not included in these systems. They're not included in the educational process to really learn about these technologies. The second thing in terms of technology that I think is really important, because we don't want to think about this as a part of the job sphere, but technology in the military. The military in so many governments holds, especially within Europe, and I know in the US, holds a lot of money in terms of the amount of money they pour into developing technologies for military purposes. And those purposes, right, those military purposes then are funneled and sold to other countries. So when we're talking about preparing jobs for the future, we really need to look at how governments are spending money in developing technologies, not only for the military, but how little they're spending money in preparing workers for the future, actual workers, people on the ground in these countries that are not being included in that system because so much money is within the military network.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Esther, I've got you, and then Carolyn, you're right after.
Well, Jessica, you made an excellent point with memory, like this idea of memory. I think it's really important, like to look back at what we have done in order to not make the same mistakes again, and also because like new technologies have like this kind of potential, like enormous potential, like to create a global democratic space. And this is exactly what we are doing right now, you know, like connecting our voices from the local to the global. So it's really, really important, and it's a revolutionary tool. It's revolutionary, really. But in order to be inclusive, I do think that we need like to invest in education, because it's also like in terms of production, who make these new technologies, you know, like who have like the power to understand how to create these new technologies, how to use them, etc. And if we don't educate people and like invest in education, because you also have like this huge like stereotypes and like gender gap and inequalities between women and men in creating these new technologies, you know. And I think that if we want like to to see new technologies like a potential to make like a real democratic, safe place, etc., we need like to include more women in production to learn how to create these new technologies and not just like how to use them, like right now on Skype, for example. You know what I mean? So I think
we don't need another app, is what you're saying.
Oh yeah, sorry. But I mean, yeah, I do think like, yeah, invest in production, in who create these new technologies. Yeah.
I love that sort of female lens as we're creating. That's essentially, we're recreating the future here. So we're creating the future. Carolyn.
Yeah, I totally agree with that at the moment, there are not enough women in those tech jobs. And especially in Germany, like Germany is really lagging behind when it comes to discussing or preparing how digitalization will change the job market. And we had this discussion of the idea of an unconditional basic income, which I found really interesting. And they have tested it in Finland, I think. But I feel like at the moment, they're not really talking about it anymore. But we always have to keep in mind that technology will take over most of our work. And then in theory, this would give people more time to maybe create new things. But then at the same time, this means that the governments, they would have to make sure that everyone still has enough money to live on. And that's why I think that like with digitalization and an unconditional basic income, this actually goes together, because it would also allow people to really focus on the things that they're good at, that they like, and then maybe also more people would do the jobs that they maybe wouldn't do because they think that they wouldn't earn enough money with this, like maybe like working in the art or doing social work. And I think it's really important that governments, they maybe hold more workshops, especially for girls and women, how to learn to code. And so that also women can be part of this movement and just be part of the tech jobs in the future.
Yeah, and I think there's some investment that's been coming along. I mean, I know the Canadian government is acknowledging it, but it, you know, I think the jobs of the future are changing so quickly, right? And that we're having a difficult time getting people up to speed at this point, and so that domination is happening. Henri, I'm curious what your thoughts are from France.
Well, I think it's about education. Like I heard a lot what you said, but I think it's really about learning, adaptation, and education. Like a sort of mix of all of this, because in terms of creating new jobs, we have like the necessary to pass by schools and learning, because this is how people will know how to do this or how to do that. And I think it's also the same for technology and what is like numeric. Sorry, I don't have the word in English, but I know, for example, that there are schools for coding or for things like this. So it will be great if we could include women into these areas in the schools, because it's mostly men, I think, who goes into this school. So we have to find a way, because it's I think, yes, women are interested in their job, in these jobs, but I don't think they have especially like a path to maybe get them to this plan, like going to a school in order to learn or something. So I think it's really, we have to work on the communication also. I don't know if what I said is clear. I know.
Well, we should be doing this in multi-languages. One day we will get there when the technology shows up, right? So that's maybe an ad. That's something that some woman can create for us. It's something that we'll be translating as we all go ahead. Jen, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I have to apologize because my connection keeps dropping and I'm only hearing fragments of what everyone's saying. So, but from what I gather, I think I'm on similar wavelength with a lot of people. If women, and not only just women, other people who are marginalized by our systems, especially indigenous peoples in Japan, and other minorities are not making the technologies, then they're not going to serve, it's not going to serve us. So we need to be a part of it. But also at the same time, I'm concerned with all of the emphasis on technology. I think we need to remember that there's value in the traditional jobs, or what we're going to be calling the traditional jobs, and not create another type of rich-poor gap between people who are doing those jobs, which are still going to be important, and these technology jobs that are going to be put on a pedestal. So I think basically the core of that is just we need to find a way to value each other as human beings, and as other people were mentioning, respect our own beautiful contributions to this earth and this globe and this planet in a more equal way. So yeah, what can the G7 do about that? Good question, I'm not sure, but that's just my thoughts.
No, and thank you, Jen, and I think that that's a part of it. Sarah Jean and then Jessica, you're going to get the last word on this one. Sarah Jean first.
I just wanted to say this is really connected to what Jennifer said, and I don't know that the G7 has much power over this, but it really starts really early. And I think that creating the interest, we have a lot of people here involved in education, including myself, but it really starts early, whether it's women, indigenous girls, indigenous children, children with disabilities, but having the opportunity at a younger age gives women the opportunity to do these things later. But I think a major problem is girls don't have equal opportunities from the get-go to be in STEM, so that they would be creating the technologies, as Jennifer said, that serve our needs more effectively.
That's an excellent
Not
point.
just for money.
Yeah, that's right. Jessica, you get the last word on jobs of the future.
Okay, so just to tie in what Uma was saying about the military monopoly on tech jobs, I completely agree. And I was having a conversation about this with a colleague of mine who is in tech. She works for a software company, and thanks to STEM, her graduate school in mathematics was paid for completely, being a woman in tech. Now, if we could take the funds that were being funneled into the military for these reasons and separate them and put them as part of general governments rather than just allotted for the military, the people who are drawn to the military are historically male. So they're serving as soldiers first and then getting the free education and the high-paid tech jobs as incidental, and then coming out on top because of this cyclical thing. But if we could separate it somehow and make it equal to all people of the community, especially women. But also, Sarah Jean makes a good point, and Jen in Japan, that these things need to come from education from the beginning and taught to young people about what they should be interested in. And we need to equalize the wealth for all vocations. And just because tech is up and coming, vocations of all kinds will be there forever. And we need to not just prioritize certain jobs, but pay more for jobs that will never go away.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you to everyone. I think this is really interesting, and it's obviously something that is super complex. And the fact that we don't know, that the world is changing so quickly, we don't have answers. But I really appreciate, thinking about what happened in the past and using those, best practices and lessons learned from the Industrial Revolution as we go into this next space. So thank you all for your ideas. What we hope the G7 leaders will be thinking about as they come together in Charlevoix, Quebec, and we are asking them to lead with courage.